Welcome to the long, tense beginning of this HOA story. It began on the quiet morning when Michael James rolled his old pickup truck down the long gravel road that led to the land he had just bought. 50 untouched acres right outside the boundary of the Maple Ridge HOA. The sun was rising over tall pine trees, painting the forest in soft gold. And for the first time in years, Michael felt like he could breathe again. He had spent years living in crowded streets, noisy apartments, and neighborhoods where people cared more about gossip than peace. This land was his escape, a chance to start fresh, to live quietly without anyone judging him or telling him what color his house could be. But he had no idea that someone was already watching him. Karen, the woman who treated the HOA like it was her personal kingdom, stood at the edge of her perfect lawn with her arms crossed, narrowing her eyes at his truck as if it had insulted her. She wasn't supposed to care about land that wasn't even part of the HOA, but Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about control. And seeing a stranger driving through what she believed was her neighborhood made her throat tighten with anger. She whispered to every neighbor walking by that this man would ruin everything, that he would destroy the community look, that he would bring chaos. No one asked how she knew that. She just said it like it was fact. In truth, she hated him before she even knew his name. Michael didn't notice the anger that followed him like a shadow. He was too busy feeling grateful as he drove past the last wooden fence post and onto his property. The dirt road curved between the trees and opened into a wide clearing he had dreamed of building a cabin on. Everything felt peaceful, until he glanced into his rearview mirror and saw someone standing at the neighborhood entrance, staring at him like he had committed a crime. He didn't know her, but she already knew him, or at least the version of him she created in her mind. Karen couldn't accept that someone had bought land she couldn't control. The idea scratched her like thorns. She wanted to know who he was, what he was building, why he chose to live so close to her perfect community. And when Michael stepped out of his truck and unloaded tools, she felt something dark grow inside her chest, something that felt like fear mixed with bitterness. She was used to giving orders, and people were used to following them. Michael didn't even look her way. That alone made her furious. Later that afternoon, when Michael installed a strong metal gate at the entrance of his private road, Karen nearly exploded. The gate was big, heavy, silver, and locked with a thick chain. It sent a message she hated. You don't belong here. You can't come in. You have no control. She walked up to it and shook it like a guard checking a prison cell, expecting it to open. It didn't move. Michael, outlining his property lines on a map inside his truck, saw her through the trees. She stood there with her lips tight and eyes sharp, like a hawk waiting to strike. When Michael walked toward her to greet her, she plastered a fake smile on her face, hiding the storm inside her. She said she wanted to welcome him to the community, even though he wasn't part of it. She spoke like she owned the whole area, like she had the right to inspect his land, his plans, his life. Michael answered politely, but the moment she asked why he needed a gate, he simply told her it was his private road and his private land. Then he went back to work. That moment, him turning his back, him refusing to explain himself, him treating her like a normal neighbor instead of a queen, lit a fire in her. Karen returned to the HOA clubhouse and immediately started whispering to the board members that Michael's gate was an eyesore and that his road blocked community access. She complained the way a spoiled child complains when someone takes a toy she wanted. But there was no community access. There never had been. The road had always been private. The land had always belonged to whoever purchased it. But Karen didn't like reality. She liked control. She told everyone that Michael was breaking HOA rules, even though the property wasn't under HOA authority. When someone tried to remind her of that, she snapped, "It affects us, so it's our business." The board members nodded like frightened birds because Karen had intimidated them for years, and none of them wanted to argue with her. Meanwhile, Michael spent the next few days cleaning the land, planning where to build his cabin, and enjoying the quiet. Every morning, though, he saw Karen standing on the edge of the HOA line, pretending to walk her dog while staring at him through the trees. Every afternoon, he saw her car creeping by slowly, as if she expected to catch him committing a crime. Every evening, she left notes on the gate demanding he remove it. The first note said it blocked a neighborhood trail. The next note said it violated community aesthetic standards. Another note claimed his road interrupted HOA landscaping plans. Michael read each note, shook his head, and tossed it into his truck. He didn't bother replying. There was no point. You can't reason with someone who creates problems just to feel powerful. One morning, when Michael drove past the HOA sign, Karen stepped directly into the road and waved her hands dramatically, forcing him to slow down. She smiled through clenched teeth and said she needed to talk. Michael lowered his window politely and listened. She said the HOA had voted that his gate needed to be removed. Michael calmly told her that he wasn't in the HOA and they had no authority over him. She insisted they had influence and that he needed to cooperate for the good of the community. When he repeated the word no, firm but calm, her entire face dropped. Her eyebrows tightened, her lips pressed together, and her eyes became sharp. She walked away without another word. From that moment on, Michael knew she wasn't just nosy. She was dangerous. That night, Karen sat at her kitchen table, tapping her nails angrily against a stack of HOA papers. She couldn't stop thinking about him. She felt like he had insulted her, embarrassed her, disrespected her authority. She kept repeating the same lines to herself. He can't just do whatever he wants. His land affects our community. This is my neighborhood. And in her mind, that meant she needed to stop him. She couldn't sleep. She stared out of her window at the dark outline of his forest, imagining what he was doing. Building something? Hiding something? Planning something? Her imagination twisted everything into a threat. She convinced herself that the only way to protect the community was to get rid of that gate and force Michael under HOA rules. She didn't care that what she wanted was illegal. She just cared about winning. The next morning, neighbors saw her marching across driveways with papers in her hands, demanding signatures, demanding support, demanding someone stand with her. Some people signed to avoid conflict. Some signed because they believed her dramatic lies. Others refused, but she didn't care. In her mind, she was fighting a war, and Michael was the enemy. She stood at the edge of the HOA line again, watching his land like she expected him to peek out so she could confront him. But Michael stayed busy, clearing brush, marking boundaries, measuring beams, unaware of how deep her obsession had grown. The final spark happened when she saw a delivery truck bring fencing supplies to his land. She watched the workers carry heavy posts and long metal sections. When Michael thanked them and drove them back toward the gate, Karen felt something inside her snap completely. She realized he wasn't just building a gate, he was building privacy. He was building distance. He was building a life without her. And that idea crushed her. She wanted him visible. She wanted him controllable. She wanted power. And seeing him build a barrier made her feel powerless for the first time in years. Michael locked the gate that night with a quiet smile, unaware that behind the trailing Karen stood watching him with eyes filled with fury, whispering to herself that she would fix this problem once and for all, even if she had to break laws to do it. And in that moment, the forest grew colder, because Karen wasn't just angry anymore. She was obsessed, and obsession always leads to trouble. Karen's obsession did not fade overnight. In fact, it grew even stronger the next morning when she saw Michael calmly loading lumber into the back of his truck as if he lived in a world without problems, without pressure, without people like her trying to stop him. The quiet confidence on his face ate at her like acid. She stood behind her curtains, gripping the fabric so tightly her knuckles turned white, watching him drive down the private road that led deep into his forest. She hated that he had a road she couldn't step on, land she couldn't see into, decisions she couldn't control. Every time his truck disappeared behind the trees, she felt like the world was slipping away from her hands. She kept replaying his calm no in her mind, hearing it again and again, each time feeling more humiliated than before. She never heard that word. People usually nodded when she spoke, moved when she pointed, followed when she demanded. But Michael had looked right at her and denied her power. That denial was not something she could forgive. While Michael worked on his land in complete peace, Karen stormed into the HOA office as if she were entering a battlefield. Her footsteps echoed across the hall, loud and angry, making the board members flinch as she approached. She slammed a stack of fake documents onto the table, paper she had spent all night printing and drawing on. Maps with red lines she invented, photos taken from far angles to make his land look messy, small paragraphs where she labeled his gate as a community threat. Her voice trembled with rage as she told them Michael was ignoring rules, violating property standards, destroying the community image. The board members exchanged nervous looks, whispering that his land wasn't even part of the HOA. But Karen cut them off sharply and insisted that external influences still affect property value. The truth didn't matter. She just needed someone to agree with her. She needed support. She needed soldiers for a war she had created in her own mind. And slowly, out of fear, 2 board members nodded. That was all she needed to continue. Meanwhile, deep in his forest clearing, Michael worked quietly, unaware of the storm she was building. He measured the edges of his land, marked where he wanted to put a small cabin, and walked through the trees with calm steps, feeling gratitude for the silence. The land smelled like pine and fresh soil, and the wind moved through the branches like soft music. This place reminded him of childhood summers with his father, fishing near tall trees and watching the sunset through golden leaves. Michael had come here for healing, but instead of healing, trouble began to circle around him like a hawk. That afternoon, when Michael drove back toward the gate, he noticed something odd: footprints in the soft dirt near the fence line. Someone had stood there recently, someone who wasn't him. He stepped out of his truck and walked slowly along the trees, checking the fence. 2 sections looked disturbed, not broken but definitely pushed. He crouched down and saw the marks, shoe prints that looked small, narrow, and oddly familiar. A chill ran through him as he followed them to the edge of the gate, where he found a shoe-shaped impression with a deep heel mark, exactly the kind of footprint someone would leave when they kicked something in frustration. He didn't need a name. He already knew. Karen had been there. He closed his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. He didn't want conflict, but conflict was coming anyway. Back in the neighborhood, Karen wasn't hiding her anger anymore. She talked louder, walked faster, and complained to anyone who listened. She told neighbors that Michael was dangerous, that his gate was aggressive, that his land could attract criminals. None of it made sense, but her voice carried fear, and fear spreads quickly. Soon a small group of residents began staring at Michael's road the same way she did, with suspicion and unnecessary worry. She felt powerful again, feeding on the attention like fuel. She finally had a crowd behind her. But deep inside, she wasn't satisfied. She needed more. She needed Michael to feel pressured, to feel watched, to feel her presence. She didn't want peace. She wanted dominance. Michael noticed the shift instantly. The next morning, when he drove past the HOA entrance, 3 neighbors stood there pretending to check their mail, but their eyes were glued to him. Their faces were stiff, cold, unsure. He nodded politely, but they didn't nod back. They whispered to each other as he drove by, and Michael felt the weight of judgment settle on his shoulders. He wasn't used to drama. He wasn't used to being misunderstood. He kept reminding himself to stay calm, to not engage, to let things settle. But deep down he knew this wasn't going to settle. Not with someone like Karen behind it. By noon, as Michael hammered beams into the ground, he heard a faint crunch of dry leaves near the fence again. He paused, listening. Then he saw movement, a figure hiding behind a tree. Pink jacket, Karen's favorite jacket. Michael didn't call out. He didn't confront her. He simply watched her through the branches as she leaned toward his fence like a thief checking for weaknesses. She tried to peer over the fence line, tiptoeing, stretching her neck, acting like the forest belonged to her. When she couldn't see anything, she huffed loudly and walked away, leaving behind another set of footprints. Michael waited until she disappeared, then walked to the gate and locked it even tighter. Something inside him softened with sadness. He didn't want to fight, but every step Karen took pushed him toward a war he didn't choose. That evening, Michael sat in his truck with the engine off, staring at the road ahead. He felt a mix of frustration and disappointment. Frustration because Karen wouldn't leave him alone. Disappointment because he had hoped this land would bring peace, not conflict. As the sun dropped low and the sky turned orange, he looked at the gate glinting in the fading light, knowing it had become a symbol of his freedom, a symbol of her anger, a symbol of everything that separated them. Karen, meanwhile, sat in her living room with the lights off, staring out the window at the distant outline of Michael's trees. Her mind was racing, her thoughts tangled, her heart burning with something heavy and twisted. She told herself she was protecting the neighborhood. But deep down, her fear wasn't about property value or community standards. It was about the feeling she couldn't control him. She had spent years building a comfortable life where everyone listened to her. Now a single man with a quiet smile had challenged that world. And she couldn't let that happen. Not without a fight. And as the night grew darker, her plans grew darker with it. Karen's anger grew heavy enough to follow her like a shadow, long and dark, stretching across the HOA streets. By the next morning, she had convinced herself that she wasn't just annoyed. She was justified. She believed she was fighting for order, for community safety, for the future of Maple Ridge. But in truth, she was fighting against something inside her, something she couldn't admit. It wasn't about the gate. It wasn't about the land. It was about power slipping out of her hands. Every time she saw Michael's truck driving calmly toward his peaceful land, she felt that slip again, like sand pouring through her fingers. She needed to stop it. She needed someone bigger than herself. And in her mind, that meant involving the county. So that morning, she marched into the county office with her folders, her fake maps, and her dramatic stories. She spoke loudly enough for everyone in the building to hear her. She told the clerk that Michael's gate blocked a public access route, even though there was no such thing. She claimed his road interfered with planned community trails, trails she invented in her own mind. She pointed at her printed maps, red arrows drawn over lines she had completely fabricated. Her voice trembled with practiced worry, her eyes flickering with exaggerated concern. She made herself look like a victim of a terrible injustice. The county clerk frowned, trying to keep his patience as she flooded him with made-up complaints. When he asked for real evidence, she changed her tone, acting offended, acting hurt, acting surprised that anyone would question her word. She demanded they do something immediately. She insisted they send someone out today. She didn't care what it took. She wanted pressure on Michael. She wanted fear on his face. An hour later, as Michael measured with beams on his land, he heard the sound of a car pulling up near his gate. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked toward the sound. 2 county officers stood there, looking slightly confused but professional. He approached calmly, greeting them with a polite nod. They explained they received complaints that his gate blocked public land. Michael blinked once, quietly surprised. Then he smiled faintly and said he had been expecting something like this. He walked them through the property lines, showed them the official documents, and even offered the exact county maps with his name on them. The officers reviewed everything carefully, their eyes widening slowly as they realized just how false the complaint had been. When everything matched perfectly and every line proved Michael was fully within his rights, one officer let out a frustrated sigh and whispered, "She lied to us." They didn't say her name, but Michael already knew. The officers apologized politely, reminding him that people sometimes confuse property details. Michael smiled lightly, hiding the sadness inside him. He told them it was okay. He wasn't angry. He didn't want trouble. He just wanted to build his cabin in peace. The officers thanked him for his patience and left with embarrassed expressions, already planning to give Karen a warning for wasting county time. But Karen didn't handle warnings well. When the officers visited her home to deliver it, she stood firm with a fake sweet smile plastered so hard it looked painful. When they explained the complaint was invalid, her smile faded into a thin line. She tried arguing, then denying, then blaming unclear maps, then claiming Michael must have manipulated something. The officers didn't argue. They just gave her a stern reminder to stop filing false complaints. For the first time, Karen felt her power ding. just a tiny crack, but she felt it deeply. And that humiliation boiled inside her like hot water in a sealed pot. Meanwhile, Michael returned to work on his land. He drilled long screws into beams, set early foundation markers, and let the quiet calm his mind. But the peace didn't last. That afternoon, he saw something that made his chest tighten. 3 HOA board members standing near his gate, staring at it like it was some monstrous structure invading their world. They didn't try to open it, but they stood close enough to make their intentions clear. They were inspecting it, judging it, planning something. He approached them slowly, not aggressive, not angry, just sad and tired. The board members got startled when they saw him and scrambled to explain that they were only reviewing community concerns. Michael told them gently that his land wasn't HOA property, and they had no right to be there. One board member tried to argue. Another mentioned visual harmony. Another mentioned neighborhood safety. Their words were weak, shaky, and unconvincing. Michael listened without interrupting, without raising his voice. He simply repeated, calm and firm, "This is private land. I am not under your HOA. Please leave." And that was it. No arguments, no shouting, no threats, just the truth. The truth they hated because it meant they had no control. When the board members walked away, Karen watched from her driveway, her face turning red with rage. She had sent them there to intimidate him, to remind him of authority. Instead, they walked away defeated. Karen felt that slip again, control falling from her hands, piece by piece. She couldn't accept that. She wouldn't accept that. That night, as the neighborhood lights dimmed and the wind rustled through the trees, Michael sat on the back of his truck, staring at the sky. The stars were soft and far away, and the moon hung above the treetops like a silver lantern. He wanted this land to be a place of calm memories, a place where he could breathe again, a place where silence meant peace, not danger. But every day, the silence grew heavier because he knew Karen wasn't done. He felt her intentions like a cold presence lurking beyond the trees. He could see the story unfolding the way a dark storm approaches. Slow, quiet, inevitable. At the same time, Karen sat inside her house with the curtains closed tightly, her hands shaking as she scrolled through online articles about property law and easement access and community protection. But none of it mattered. She wasn't reading to learn. She was reading to justify her anger. Her obsession swallowed her whole, filling her with a twisted belief that if she didn't stop Michael, she would lose everything she ever controlled. And as midnight passed, she made a decision. One that would push the conflict to a place Michael never wanted to go. A decision that would drag everyone into a deeper mess. Karen's anger had now grown into something darker, something almost poisonous. She had tried HOA meetings. She had tried county complaints. She had tried whispering lies to neighbors, and every attempt had slipped through her fingers like water. Each failure made her feel smaller, weaker, more invisible. She hated that feeling. She hated that Michael didn't react the way she wanted. She hated that he stayed calm while she burned inside. She needed a victory, something big, something that would remind everyone in Maple Ridge that she was still the one in control. And so she made a choice that crossed every line, every boundary, every law she claimed to protect. She decided to break into Michael's land. It was late in the evening when she put her plan into action. The sky was fading into deep blue, the last bits of daylight slipping behind the treetops. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet where every small sound seems louder, every shadow feels alive. Karen put on a dark jacket, pulled her hair into a tight bun, and stepped outside with the nervous energy of someone doing something they knew was wrong but convinced themselves was right. She didn't go alone. She dragged 2 HOA board members with her. Men who were too scared to say no to her. Men who followed out of fear, not loyalty. They whispered that this was a bad idea, but Karen silenced them with a sharp look, the kind of look that froze words in their throats. They walked toward Michael's gate, staying half hidden by bushes and streetlights, as if they were characters in a cheap spy movie. Karen's heart pounded fast, not from guilt but from excitement. She felt powerful again. She felt like she was finally doing something that would force Michael to obey. She believed that if she proved his gate was dangerous or unstable, she could legally demand its removal. But deep down, she just wanted to break down the one thing that stood between her and his land. The one thing she couldn't control. Michael, meanwhile, was back on his property, walking through the trees with a lantern in his hand, checking fence lines and making sure everything was secure. He didn't know why, but he felt something strange in the air. Not fear, not panic, but a sense that the night was holding its breath. The wind felt colder. The silence felt heavy. He had the uneasy feeling that someone had crossed a boundary inside themselves, and soon they would cross his. At the gate, Karen looked at the lock with narrowed eyes. She grabbed it with both hands and shook it violently, her frustration bubbling out in breathless grunts. The board members flinched, looking over their shoulders, terrified someone might see. Karen didn't care. She pulled harder, kicked the metal bars, and cursed under her breath. When the gate didn't move, she grew angrier. She walked along the fence line, pushing it, shaking the posts, testing for weaknesses. At one point, she even tried climbing a section, her shoes slipping on the metal as she scrambled like a thief desperate to get in. Her jacket caught on a wire, tearing slightly, but she yanked it free without even noticing. All she saw was the land she believed she deserved the right to walk on. Unluckily for her, she wasn't invisible. Michael had installed wildlife cameras earlier that week, small and unnoticed, hidden behind branches, facing the gate and fence. And tonight, those cameras captured everything. The shaky gate, the kicks, the climbing attempts, the angry expressions, the desperate whispers. The footage didn't lie. It didn't exaggerate. It simply showed the truth. Karen trespassing. Karen damaging property. Karen attempting to break into private land with the help of HOA board members. She didn't realize she was giving Michael the exact evidence he needed. Evidence that would change everything. But at that moment, Karen didn't care about consequences. She only cared about breaking through. When she couldn't, she grew louder, her voice cracking with frustration. "This is community land. He can't block us forever," she snapped, even though deep inside she knew it was a lie. One of the board members tried to calm her, saying they should leave before someone noticed. Karen turned on him so fast he stepped back in fear. "I'm not leaving," she hissed. "Not until he learns he can't ignore me." Her voice sounded different, tighter, more unstable, like she was unraveling. Eventually, after nearly 20 minutes of failed attempts, the three of them slipped away into the darkness, leaving behind footprints, bent fence wires, and a lock that now hung slightly twisted from her kicking. The forest swallowed their retreating figures, but the damage had already been done. The next morning, Michael returned to the gate to find the fresh marks. Scratches on the lock, scuff marks on the bars, patches of disturbed dirt. He crouched down, running his hand slowly over the bent metal, feeling a strange mixture of sadness and disappointment. He didn't want this kind of ugliness in his life. He didn't want conflict. He didn't want enemies. But someone had decided he needed one. He opened the camera footage on his phone, and as he watched Karen shaking the gate like a wild animal, something inside him hardened. Not anger, but resolve. He finally understood that ignoring her wouldn't make her stop. Silence wasn't peace. Patience wasn't safety. Karen had escalated to a place where no reasonable person should go. And it wasn't over. That night, the footage replayed in his mind while he sat beside his truck under the stars. The sky glowed softly above him. The trees swayed gently. But beneath that calm beauty, Michael felt the weight of coming trouble. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was simply tired. Tired of being pushed. Tired of being bothered. Tired of watching someone try to tear down his peace. He knew Karen wasn't finished. Her obsession wouldn't allow her to stop. Her pride wouldn't allow her to accept defeat. And he knew this was only the beginning of something much bigger. Across the neighborhood, Karen sat in her living room again, her legs shaking restlessly, her mind burning with the memory of the broken fence wire and the stubborn, unmoving gate. She convinced herself she was the victim, wronged, disrespected, ignored, and in her swirling anger, she made a new promise to herself. one that twisted everything inside her even further. The sun rose slowly the next morning, but it couldn't hide the tension crawling through Maple Ridge. People were whispering on driveways, avoiding eye contact, pretending to water plants just to watch the entrance of Michael's road. Something felt wrong in the air, heavy, sharp, like the sky itself was holding a breath. And the reason for that heaviness was a single woman pacing back and forth in her kitchen, her eyes wild with anger and humiliation. Karen. She had watched the county officers walk away helpless. She had watched the HOA board return confused. She had tried breaking the gate herself and still failed. Every failure replayed in her head like a cruel movie she couldn't turn off. And now the movie had a new scene, neighbors quietly questioning her judgment. She saw their glances. She heard their whispers. Some still feared her, but others had started doubting her. Doubt was worse than defeat. Doubt meant she was losing her grip on the community she had ruled for years. By afternoon, she snapped. She called for an emergency HOA meeting. Not one inside the clubhouse, but one outside, in the open, on the sidewalk near Michael's gate. She wanted a show. She wanted an audience. She wanted the whole neighborhood to see her take action. She stood there with a clipboard in her hands, barking orders as if she were commanding soldiers. She walked up and down the street telling people that they had no choice, that Michael's gate posed a danger, that his land was harming property values, and that the HOA must take physical action. Her voice trembled with emotion, but it wasn't fear. It was fury pretending to be leadership. Slowly, through pressure and fear, she gathered a group. 7 or 8 HOA volunteers stood behind her, some holding tools, some gripping ropes, some too scared to leave. They didn't even know exactly what they were there for. All they knew was that Karen wanted a crowd, and refusing her felt like choosing a fight most of them didn't want. She promised them they were restoring order. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said revenge. By late afternoon, a strange little parade formed. An angry HOA leader in front, confused neighbors behind, all walking toward Michael's private gate carrying tools that had no business being there. Hammers, crowbars, bolt cutters, things no HOA meeting should ever involve. The sound of their footsteps echoed strangely through the quiet neighborhood. Some people peeked from their windows, shocked. Others followed from a distance, wanting to see the drama they could gossip about later. And through all of it, Karen marched with her chin high, convinced she was doing something noble. Michael had no idea any of this was happening. He was deep in his forest, cutting small branches, preparing a foundation space for his cabin. He paused every few minutes to wipe sweat from his forehead, enjoying the cool breeze, enjoying the peace he fought so hard to protect. But peace once again didn't last. He heard a faint vibration in the ground, something like footsteps. Many footsteps, heavy, unsteady, approaching. A strange feeling rose in his chest, a quiet pull telling him something was wrong. He set his tools down and walked through the trees toward the sound. The closer he got, the louder the murmur became, voices overlapping, metal clinking, commands being shouted. Michael's heart sank when the trees parted enough for him to see silhouettes gathering near the gate. He froze for a moment, disbelief washing over him. It wasn't one person. It wasn't Karen alone. It was a group, a whole group of people standing at the front of his road like a crowd ready to tear something down. He stepped closer just in time to hear Karen raise her voice with dramatic force. "We're removing this gate today, for community safety." Her words sliced through the air like a knife. The volunteers lifted their tools uncertainly. Some looked nervous. Some looked afraid. Some looked like they regretted coming. But Karen didn't hesitate. She walked straight to the gate and lifted a crowbar as if she had every right in the world to touch it. Michael's voice cut through the tension like a sudden gust of wind. "That's enough." It wasn't loud, but it was firm, so firm it froze the entire group mid-step. Karen turned, shock flashing across her face before rage took over again. "You don't get to ignore us anymore," she yelled. But before she could take another step, another voice echoed across the clearing. Deep, commanding, unmistakable. "Ma'am, step away from the gate." Every head snapped toward the sound. A county sheriff stepped out from behind Michael, walking calmly but with unmistakable authority. His cruiser sat hidden behind the curve of the road. He had come earlier than anyone knew, thanks to Michael sending him the wildlife camera footage that morning. Footage that showed Karen kicking, shaking, and climbing the fence like a criminal. And the sheriff had seen enough. Karen's face drained of color. "This is a misunderstanding," she stuttered. "We were only trying to—" "You were trying to break into private property?" The sheriff cut in, his tone cold and unwavering. The board members swallowed hard. The volunteers shuffled backward. A woman dropped the rope she was holding. Someone whispered, "Oh no!" The sheriff didn't stop. He held up a tablet and pressed play. The wildlife footage appeared clearly. Karen grabbing the gate, kicking the post, yelling, trying to climb. The board members trying to pry the fence. The sound of metal shaking violently filled the air. Everyone stared in stunned silence as the truth played out in glaring daylight. Karen's mouth opened and closed like she was drowning in her own lies. "You damaged his property," the sheriff said slowly. "You trespassed. You attempted forced entry. And you brought people here today with tools to do it again." Karen shook her head wildly. "No, I was protecting the community. This land affects us. He can't just—" "He owns this land," the sheriff replied sharply. "He owns the road. He owns the space you're standing on. And he has the right to file charges." A soft gasp spread through the crowd like a ripple. Michael didn't gloat. He didn't shout. He didn't mock her. He simply stood there with quiet sadness in his eyes. He had never wanted it to come this far. He had never wanted to involve law enforcement. He had hoped she would calm down. But some storms don't calm. They only get louder until they burn everything around them. Karen tried one final desperate lie. "This is HOA land. We have rights." The sheriff turned to her and said the words that broke her like glass. "Michael owns every inch of the land you are claiming, and the HOA has zero authority outside its boundaries. You crossed those boundaries. Today and last night." Karen's knees weakened. Her breath stumbled. Reality hit her harder than any punishment. She had lost. Publicly. Completely. And she knew the neighborhood was watching. One by one, the volunteers stepped away from her, putting down their tools, distancing themselves from her madness. The board members avoided her eyes. Someone whispered, "She's done." Someone else muttered, "She took it too far." Michael looked at the broken gate, the damaged fence, the shaken crowd, and then at Karen. Standing small for the first time, truly small, without her power, without her lies, without her control. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply exhaled. A long, tired breath of final understanding. Karen had reached her breaking point, and now the whole community knew it. The air felt heavier than ever as the sheriff's words settled over the clearing, sinking deep into the quiet like stones dropped into still water. Karen stood frozen, her pride cracking in front of everyone she once commanded. The volunteers backed away slowly, like people stepping away from a fire they suddenly realized could burn them too. The board members stared at the ground, their faces pale and tight, shame curling around them like smoke. But the person who felt the quiet the most was Michael. He looked at the twisted metal on his gate, the bent fence line, the tools scattered by Karen's angry hands. He had come to this land to escape noise, and somehow noise had followed him anyway. Yet even in the middle of chaos, he stood calm, shoulders steady, eyes soft. He didn't want to humiliate her. He didn't want revenge. He only wanted peace, something Karen had never understood. The sheriff stepped closer to Karen, his boots crunching on gravel with slow, controlled firmness. "Ma'am," he said, voice low and unshakable. "You need to understand the seriousness of what you've done." Karen swallowed hard, but the sound barely made it past her throat. Her mouth opened, then shut, then opened again, but no words came. For the first time, she wasn't speaking. For the first time, she had no script, no excuses, no command. The silence around her felt like a rope tightening. Her eyes darted from the sheriff to the neighbors to Michael, each face reflecting something she couldn't bear. Disappointment, disbelief, judgment. She had become the villain in the story she invented. The sheriff continued, "You trespassed on private property. You attempted forced entry. You organized a group to damage a locked gate. And you filed false complaints with the county." Karen shook her head in slow, panicked denial. I was only trying to help the neighborhood," she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. But the sheriff didn't soften. "Helping doesn't involve breaking the law." His words sliced straight through her. She felt her chest tighten, breath shaking, anger collapsing into fear. She looked around for support, for someone to stand with her, even one person to nod, but nobody stepped forward. Not one. Michael finally spoke, his tone quiet but strong, carrying a weight that hit harder than shouting ever could. "Karen, I never wanted a fight with you." His voice was tired, almost sad. "You could have just left me alone." Karen's eyes glistened, a mix of hatred and humiliation burning behind them. She had always imagined Michael as the enemy, but now she saw something she couldn't process. He wasn't angry at her. He was disappointed, and somehow that hurt more than everything else. The sheriff took a slow breath. "I've reviewed the footage. Charges can be filed." The words struck the crowd like thunder. A gasp rippled through the volunteers, and even the board members stiffened in dread. Karen stumbled a step backward as if someone had pushed her. "Charges?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "You can't. He can't. This isn't." But even she didn't know how to finish the sentence. Reality had finally caught her. Michael looked at the sheriff, then at Karen. He didn't speak for a long moment, the wind moving softly through the trees while everyone waited. His chest rose slowly, then fell. He didn't want to ruin someone's life. He didn't want to drag her to court. But he also couldn't ignore everything she had done. He had to protect his land, his peace, his rights. So he spoke carefully, choosing each word like it mattered. "Sheriff," he said softly, "I'm not filing charges today." A wave of relief swept through the group so suddenly that a few people exhaled out loud. But Michael wasn't finished. "But," he added, his voice firming like steel, "if anything like this happens again, if she steps one foot on my land, touches this gate, files another false claim, or threatens me, I will pursue every legal option." Karen looked up sharply. Her eyes widened in a mixture of shock and humiliation. She wasn't being forgiven. She was being warned. Her position, her power, had been reduced to a fragile line she wasn't allowed to cross again. The sheriff nodded. "That's more than fair," he said. Then he turned to Karen. "You are officially trespassed from this property. If you come near this gate again without permission, I will arrest you." The words hit her harder than any insult ever had. Arrest. That one word ignited panic deep inside her chest. Her breathing grew uneven, her hands shaking slightly as she tried to hold onto whatever dignity she had left. But dignity didn't follow her anymore. Karen's legs felt weak as she looked around at the faces she used to command. Neighbors who once feared her, people who once obeyed her. Now they looked at her like a stranger, someone they didn't recognize anymore. Her reputation, her influence, her pride, all shattered on the gravel beneath her feet. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. Not anger, not excuses, not authority, only silence. The volunteers slowly backed away, heading toward the sidewalk one by one, leaving Karen alone in front of the gate she had tried so hard to break. Some of them refused to look at her. Others glanced with pity. A few turned their heads quickly, not wanting to witness her fall. The board members walked away too, their shoulders slumped, their confidence gone, muttering weak apologies to Michael as they passed him. They weren't following Karen anymore. They were abandoning her. The sheriff stepped back, giving Michael a respectful nod. "Call me if anything happens," he said before heading to his cruiser. The engine rumbled to life, and the sound faded down the road as he drove away. Soon, only two people remained. Michael standing calm and steady, and Karen standing broken and shaking. Michael didn't approach her. He didn't speak again. He simply turned and walked toward his land, his footsteps slow and heavy on the gravel. and Karen watched him go with a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. He wasn't bothered by her anymore. And somehow that hurt her worse than any punishment. For years, Karen had lived off fear, other people's fear. But now, as the shadows of the forest stretched across the road, she finally felt her own. And it wasn't a fear of Michael. It wasn't a fear of the sheriff. It was the fear of losing everything she built her identity on. Her power, her control, her voice, her influence, all gone. Michael disappeared into the trees, and Karen finally turned away, walking slowly down the road like someone who had aged 10 years in one moment. Her pride was cracked, her authority was shattered, and her war was over. But the story wasn't done yet. Not until the entire neighborhood learned the final truth, and not until Karen faced what came next. Days passed, but the silence inside Maple Ridge was heavier than any noise. It sat on porches, lingered in driveways, and followed people like a shadow that refused to leave. Everyone felt the shift. Everyone except Karen, whose world had cracked so loudly that even her house felt different. She kept her curtains closed, avoiding every window, terrified to step outside because she knew the moment she did, the whispers would begin. She could imagine them already. She went too far. She lost it. She tried to break into his land. She almost got arrested. Those whispers felt like tiny knives against her pride, and every one of them cut deeper than the last. She used to walk the neighborhood with her chin high, giving orders like she was running a kingdom. Now she moved like a ghost inside her own home, pacing with restless hands, her heart thumping with a mixture of shame and anger. She tried to convince herself that people were exaggerating, that they didn't understand her intentions, that she had only wanted to protect the community. But no matter how many lies she told herself, the truth kept returning like a cold wind creeping under the door. She had gone too far, and everyone saw it. Meanwhile, Michael kept living the life he had wanted all along. Quiet, calm, steady. He didn't brag about winning. He didn't talk badly about her. He didn't hold anger in his chest. He simply worked on his land, respecting the space around him the same way he wished others would respect his. Every morning, the sound of his tools echoed softly through the trees, building beams, shaping frames, lifting dreams. He didn't need attention. He didn't need validation. His peace was his victory. His silence was his strength. And that quiet strength spread through the neighborhood slowly, gently, reminding everyone that power isn't in loud voices. It's in steady hearts. Yet even as he moved forward, he couldn't help but feel a soft ache in his chest whenever he remembered the way Karen had looked standing alone after the sheriff left. Not the angry Karen he first met, but the final Karen, the defeated one, the one who suddenly realized she had no more weapons, no more lies, no more authority. For a moment, he had seen something human beneath all the bitterness. Someone lost. Someone who didn't know who she was without control. He didn't excuse her actions, but he understood something deeper. People who break others are usually broken themselves. The entire neighborhood watched Karen's fall ripple through Maple Ridge like waves in still water. The HOA board held a quiet vote, one without Karen's influence, one where real voices were finally heard, and every single member voted to remove her from her position. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. They were tired of being dragged into battles they didn't choose. They were tired of being blamed, used, manipulated. And the moment Karen received the official letter on her doorstep, her body almost gave way. She sank onto her couch, the paper trembling in her hand, her breath shallow. The title she held for years gone. The authority she built her entire identity around, erased. The person she was, fading. She didn't scream. She didn't lash out. She just sat there, staring at the letter, the silence in her home louder than any argument she ever had. For the first time in her life, Karen felt small. Not because someone made her small, but because she had never learned how to stand without stepping on others. And now that she had no one left to step on, she didn't know how to stand at all. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People nodded quietly, some relieved, some thoughtful. They talked softly about how things got out of hand, how far Karen had gone, how things would be different now. They didn't celebrate, not loudly anyway. They simply accepted the truth. Michael's strength had exposed Karen's weakness, and now the neighborhood had to rebuild trust, calm, and balance. On the evening after her removal, Karen walked outside for the first time, her steps slow and unsure. She wore a simple sweater, no clipboard, no expression of authority, just a tired woman taking careful steps across her yard. Neighbors saw her and turned away, not out of cruelty but out of awkwardness, unsure of how to face someone they once feared. Karen looked toward Michael's private road in the distance, the gate standing strong and clean, reflecting the light of the setting sun. She felt a sharp pinch in her chest. Not jealousy, not hatred, but something else. Something she hadn't felt in years, regret. She wished she could take back the lies, the meetings, the fake maps, the trespassing, the attempts to embarrass him. But life doesn't rewind. It reveals. At the same moment, Michael was walking toward the gate with tools in his hand. He wasn't fixing damage because he had already repaired that days ago. He was simply checking on the new posts he installed, making sure everything was secure. He saw Karen from a distance, small, thin, fragile against the fading light. Their eyes met for a brief second. She quickly looked away, but not fast enough to hide the sadness in her face. Michael didn't wave. He didn't smile. He didn't confront her. He simply offered a small, respectful nod. A gesture that said, "It's over. You don't have to fight anymore." A gesture that carried no anger. A gesture that carried no victory dance. Just quiet forgiveness. The kind that comes from someone who has nothing left to prove. Karen's eyes filled with tears she didn't expect. Not loud sobbing tears, silent ones. The kind that fall when a person realizes they were wrong for so long and has run out of excuses to hide behind. She nodded back, a tiny, trembling nod, before returning inside, closing her door softly, no longer slamming it like before. And just like that, the war she created finally ended. Not with police sirens, not with shouting, not with revenge, but with silence, understanding, and a slow rebuilding of peace. From that day on, Michael's gate remained locked, not out of fear, but out of rightful privacy. And Karen never approached it again. She stayed quiet, humbler, almost invisible in the community she once ruled with an iron voice. Everyone in Maple Ridge learned a powerful lesson that year. You cannot control what you do not own. You cannot break someone who stands quietly but firmly. And you cannot take peace from a man who built it with his own hands. Michael continued building his cabin, day by day, piece by piece, with the strength of someone who knew the storm had passed. And every evening, when the sun dipped behind the trees, he looked at his land, not with fear of intrusion, but with gratitude for the calm he had finally, truly earned. His gate stayed locked. His land stayed peaceful. Karen stayed away, forever. And the neighborhood never forgot the day a single man's quiet courage changed everything.